When Marcus Thornfield ripped off his fake beard in front of 50 Los Angeles socialites at his pre-wedding party, his fiancée's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered across the marble floor. For 3 weeks, he'd been the invisible gateman watching through security cameras as Isabella Crane systematically poisoned his elderly mother. But what Marcus didn't expect was Grace Chen, a 28-year-old maid from San Francisco working 2 jobs to support her younger sister through college, who would risk everything to protect a dying woman she barely knew. This is the story of what happened during those 3 weeks. The silent war fought in a Pacific Palisades mansion, where evil wore designer clothes and courage came from the most unexpected place. Before this story continues, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will have you on the edge of your seat, and drop a comment telling everyone where you're watching from and what time it is. New York? Miami? Seattle? What time zone are you in? Let the community know. And here's the question. If you saw someone being hurt but speaking up could cost you everything, your job, your home, your future, would you stay silent or would you act? Answer honestly in the comments. Now let me take you back to day 3 of Marcus's undercover operation, the day everything changed because a stranger showed up for a job interview. Grace Chen had been in Los Angeles for exactly 43 days when she walked through the iron gates of the Thornfield mansion in Pacific Palisades. 43 days since she'd left her cramped studio apartment in San Francisco's Tenderloin district, left her night shift at a 24-hour diner, left everything familiar to take a chance on a live-in maid position that paid twice what she'd been making. She needed the money desperately. Her sister Emily was a junior at UC Berkeley studying pre-med, and their parents, immigrants who'd worked in San Francisco's Chinatown garment factories for 30 years, had passed away within 6 months of each other 2 years ago. Grace had promised her mother on her deathbed that Emily would finish college, would become the doctor their mother had always dreamed about. That promise meant Grace worked 80-hour weeks. It meant she wore the same 3 outfits in rotation. It meant she lived on instant ramen and hope. So when the Domestic Staff Solutions Agency called about a position in LA, live-in, good pay, wealthy family, just light housekeeping, and helping with an elderly resident, Grace had said yes without hesitation. What she didn't know was that she was walking into a crime scene in progress. Isabella Crane opened the door wearing cream-colored Valentino and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked Grace up and down, taking in the simple Target dress, the worn flats, the nervous way Grace clutched her small overnight bag. "You must be Grace. Come in." The house was stunning. Grace had cleaned homes in Pacific Heights and Russian Hill back in San Francisco, but nothing like this. Marble floors that reflected the morning light, a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than Grace would make in 5 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean. "The position is simple," Isabella said, walking through the house like a queen surveying her kingdom. "Light cleaning, some meal preparation, and most importantly, helping care for my fiancé's mother, Margaret. She has Alzheimer's. Do you have experience with elderly care?" Grace thought of her own grandmother, who'd lived with them in their small Chinatown apartment until she passed. How Grace had helped her bathe, dress, take her medications. How she'd sat beside her bed during the bad nights when the past and present mixed together in her grandmother's mind. "Yes, ma'am. My grandmother had dementia. I took care of her for 3 years." Isabella's smile widened. "Perfect. Now, I need to be clear about something. The previous maid was problematic. She questioned my decisions, interfered with family matters. I won't tolerate that. You're here to work, not to have opinions. Understood?" Something cold moved through Grace's chest, but she needed this job. Emily's tuition payment was due in 3 weeks. "Understood, ma'am." "Good. Let me show you to your room, and then you can meet Margaret." Grace's room was on the 2nd floor, small but clean, with a view of the garden. It was the nicest room she'd had since leaving home. After Grace unpacked her few belongings, Isabella led her down the hall to another bedroom. Margaret Thornfield was sitting by the window in a chair that seemed too big for her thin frame. She wore a soft blue cardigan and looked like she'd been elegant once, before illness had carved her down to bones and fragile skin. When she turned at the sound of the door, Grace saw eyes that were sharp despite the disease, eyes that held fear. "Margaret, this is Grace. She's our new helper. Grace will be bringing you your meals and helping you with anything you need." Margaret's gaze moved from Isabella to Grace and back again. There was something in that look, a warning maybe, or a plea. "Hello, Mrs. Thornfield," Grace said softly, moving into the room. "It's very nice to meet you." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "Are you kind?" The question caught Grace off guard. Yes, ma'am. I try to be." "Good. I need someone kind." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I need someone who'll listen." "That's enough, Margaret," Isabella cut in smoothly. "You're getting emotional. That's not good for you. Grace, why don't you start by familiarizing yourself with the kitchen? I'll call you when it's time to bring Margaret her lunch." Grace followed Isabella out, but she looked back once. Margaret was staring at her with an intensity that made Grace's heart squeeze. Something was very wrong in this beautiful house. What Grace didn't know was that at that exact moment, Marcus was in his downtown office watching the entire interaction on his phone. Watching this stranger, this young woman who looked barely older than a college student, meet his mother for the first time. He'd been skeptical when he saw Isabella had hired someone new. Another person Isabella thought she could control. Another person who would look the other way. But when Grace had asked, "Are you kind?" and the girl had answered with such simple sincerity, something in Marcus's chest had loosened just slightly. Maybe this one would be different. He had no idea how right he was. Grace's first day passed in a blur of learning where things were kept, understanding Isabella's exacting standards for how towels should be folded and floors should be cleaned. Isabella watched her constantly, correcting the smallest mistakes with sharp words. But what struck Grace most was how little food Margaret seemed to eat. At lunch, Grace brought a tray to Margaret's room, a small bowl of soup and half a sandwich. When she returned an hour later to collect the tray, the food was barely touched. "Mrs. Thornfield, you didn't eat much. Are you feeling okay?" Margaret looked around nervously as if checking for listeners. "I'm so hungry," she whispered, "but the food, it tastes wrong. Makes me sleepy." Grace frowned. "Wrong how?" "Bitter. Chemical." Margaret gripped Grace's hand suddenly. "She put something in it. I know she does. But everyone thinks I'm confused. Everyone thinks it's the Alzheimer's making me paranoid." Grace felt her pulse quicken. "Mrs. Thornfield, Margaret, please call me Margaret." "Margaret, has Mr. Thornfield noticed you're not eating? Marcus is traveling, Singapore. He's always working." Margaret's voice broke. "And when he's here, she's so sweet, so perfect. He doesn't see. No one sees." Grace should have walked away, should have told herself this was the disease talking. Alzheimer's patients often develop paranoid delusions. She'd learned that caring for her grandmother. But her grandmother's paranoia had been about people stealing things that were never stolen, voices that weren't there. Not about food tasting bitter. Not with that specific look of terror in her eyes. "What if I brought you something from the kitchen?" Grace heard herself say. "Something I make myself, that Miss Crane doesn't touch." Margaret's eyes widened with hope so desperate it hurt to see. "Would you?" "Of course. Give me a few minutes." Grace went down to the kitchen. Isabella was in the living room on a phone call, her back turned. Moving quietly, Grace made a simple peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Something pre-made, nothing that could be tampered with. She poured a glass of milk straight from the carton, then carried it upstairs on a small plate. Margaret ate like she was starving, which Grace realized with growing horror she probably was. "Thank you," Margaret breathed when she'd finished. "Thank you so much." "Of course. I'll make sure you eat, Margaret. I promise." It was a promise Grace meant. A promise she had no idea would nearly cost her everything. That night, Marcus returned to the mansion as Robert Santos, the gate man. He'd spent the day at his downtown office, then checked into his hotel room to transform. Beard applied, gray dye in his hair, cheap glasses, the limp from the padded shoe. When Miguel from Secure Staff dropped him off at 9:30 p.m., Marcus settled into the gatehouse and pulled up the security camera feeds on the monitors. He flipped through the cameras. Living room, empty. Kitchen, empty. His mother's bedroom, She was sleeping, finally looking peaceful. And then he found Grace. She was in her small room, sitting on the edge of her bed, talking on a phone. Marcus turned up the audio feed. "No, Em, I'm fine. The job is good. The house is beautiful." Grace's voice was warm but tired. "How are your classes?" A younger voice came through the phone. "Organic chemistry is killing me. I had a midterm today and I'm pretty sure I bombed it." "You always think you bombed it, and then you get an A." "Not this time. I don't know, Grace. Sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for medical school." "Don't you dare," Grace said fiercely. "You're brilliant. Mom and Dad would be so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. I hate that you're working so hard for me. I could take a semester off, get a job." "Absolutely not. You're staying in school. I'm fine, Em. Really. This job is actually easier than the diner." They talked for a few more minutes before Grace hung up. Then she sat there in the dim light of her room, and Marcus watched her put her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. She was crying, but silently, the way people cry when they're used to not being heard. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. This girl was alone in the world except for her sister, working herself to exhaustion, and Isabella had hired her specifically because she seemed desperate enough not to cause trouble. But Isabella had miscalculated, because people who'd fought for everything they had, people like Grace, like Marcus himself, those people didn't look away from injustice. They recognized it too well. Day 5 was when things escalated. Marcus was at the house during the day. He'd kept up his charade of working from home. He was in his office when he heard raised voices from his mother's bedroom. He pulled up the camera feed immediately. Isabella stood over Margaret's bed, holding a pill organizer. Grace stood near the door, her face carefully neutral. "Time for your medications, Margaret," Isabella said with false sweetness. Margaret shook her head. "I don't want them. They make me feel strange. They're prescribed by your doctor. You have to take them." "No." Isabella's face went hard. "Grace, hold her arms." Grace didn't move. "Ma'am?" "I said hold her arms. She needs to take her medications and she's being difficult." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. On the screen, Grace's face showed her internal struggle. Then she spoke, voice quiet but firm. "Mrs. Crane, if Mrs. Thornfield doesn't want to take her medications right now, maybe we should wait. Call her doctor, make sure the dosage is right." Isabella turned slowly. "Excuse me?" "I'm just saying, if the medications are making her feel bad, maybe... Are you a doctor?" "Grace?" "No, ma'am." "Are you a nurse?" "No, ma'am." "Then I suggest you do your job and let me handle Margaret's medical care." Isabella's voice was ice. "Or do you not want this job anymore?" Marcus watched Grace's face on the monitor, watched her swallow hard, watched her make a choice. "I want this job, ma'am, but I won't force medications on someone who's saying no." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Isabella smiled, the same smile a snake might give before striking. "I see. Well, I suppose I can respect that. We'll try again later. Grace, why don't you go clean the bathrooms? All of them. With a toothbrush." "Yes, ma'am." After Grace left, Isabella turned back to Margaret. Marcus couldn't hear what she said. She'd lowered her voice below the microphone's range. But he saw his mother's face go pale with fear. And Marcus knew. It was time to stop watching and start acting. That night, as Robert Santos, Marcus made a decision. He needed to talk to Grace. Needed to know if she suspected what he suspected. Needed to know if she could be trusted. At 2 a.m., Marcus saw Grace leave her room. He watched her on the monitors as she went quietly to the kitchen, made a sandwich, and carried it upstairs to his mother's room. She was feeding Margaret. In the middle of the night, when Isabella was asleep, Grace was making sure his mother ate. Marcus felt his throat tighten. At 3 a.m., Grace came back downstairs. She didn't return to her room. Instead, she went out to the garden, sitting on a bench near the rose bushes, crying softly into her hands. Marcus made his decision. He left the gatehouse and walked quietly across the lawn. "Miss, are you all right?" Grace jumped, spinning around. In the dim garden lights, her face was streaked with tears. "Oh, you're..." You're the security guard. Robert, right? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry to intrude. I just wanted to make sure you were safe out here. Grace wiped her eyes quickly. I'm fine. Just needed some air. Marcus sat down on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. You're the new maid. Yes, Grace. Grace Chen. Nice to meet you, Miss Chen. You settling in okay? She laughed, but it was bitter. Is it that obvious I'm struggling? I've worked security for rich families for a long time. I've seen a lot of maids come and go. The ones who cry in gardens at 3 a.m. usually don't last long. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then, can I ask you something? And you'll keep it confidential? Marcus's heart beat faster. Of course. The cameras. You watch them, right? All the feeds from inside the house? That's my job. So you've seen... She trailed off, choosing her words carefully. You've seen how Mrs. Crane treats Mrs. Thornfield. Marcus kept his voice neutral, his accent in place. I've seen some things, yes. And you haven't done anything? Done what, miss? It's not my place to question how employers treat their family members. Grace stood up abruptly, pacing. That woman is starving Margaret. She's giving her wrong medications. I checked the pill bottles against the prescription labels. Nothing matches. Margaret says the food tastes bitter, chemical. She's terrified, and everyone just acts like it's normal. Like it's okay because Margaret has Alzheimer's, so who's going to believe her? She spun to face him, tears streaming down her face now. I need this job. My sister's tuition is due in 2 weeks. If I lose this job, I can't pay it. She'll have to drop out of Berkeley. Everything my parents worked for, everything I've worked for, gone. But I can't. Her voice broke. I can't just watch an old woman be abused. I can't do it. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. This stranger, this brave, foolish stranger who was willing to sacrifice everything for a woman she'd known less than a week. He stood up slowly. Miss Chen, what if I told you someone is already watching? Someone who's documenting everything? She stared at him. What? What if I told you that help is coming, but it takes time to build a case? That speaking up too soon might make things worse? How do you know that? Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because I've been in this house for 5 days. Because I've been watching the cameras 24/7. Because I've seen you sneak food to Margaret 3 times now. And because, he paused, making a decision. Because someone very powerful is already moving against Isabella Crane. Someone who will make sure Margaret is safe. But we need evidence. Real, undeniable evidence. Grace's eyes were wide. Who? Who's doing this? I can't tell you that, but I need you to trust me. Can you keep doing what you're doing? Protecting Margaret? Feeding her? Being her ally? For just a little while longer? How much longer? 2 weeks, maybe less. Can you do that? Grace wrapped her arms around herself. What if she hurts Margaret before then? Then you call me immediately. I'm here every night. I'm watching. If Isabella tries anything severe, I'll call the police myself. But if we can catch her on camera with clear intent, she won't just lose access to Margaret. She'll go to prison. Grace searched his face. You're not just a security guard, are you? Marcus smiled slightly. I'm exactly what you need me to be. Someone who cares. Someone who's watching. Someone who won't let Margaret die. After a long moment, Grace nodded. Okay, 2 weeks. But if anything happens, nothing will happen. I promise. It was a promise Marcus wasn't entirely sure he could keep. But looking at Grace's desperate hope, he knew he had to try. Day 7 was when Isabella made her first real mistake. Marcus was in the gatehouse that night, monitoring the feeds when he saw Isabella enter Margaret's room at midnight. Margaret was asleep, truly asleep, not drugged, thanks to Grace swapping out her evening medications earlier that day with vitamins that looked similar. Isabella didn't know that. She stood over the bed looking down at Margaret with an expression Marcus had never seen before. Pure hatred, pure calculation. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. Marcus immediately started recording the audio feed. It's me, Isabella said quietly. No, he's still traveling back and forth. Barely home. Perfect. A pause. The old woman is tougher than expected. I've been giving her the medications for 3 weeks and she's still hanging on. The maid is becoming a problem too. She's too attentive. I might need to fire her. Marcus's blood went cold. Another pause. No, I can't wait until after the wedding. His lawyers are drawing up a new will. If we get married before Margaret dies, he'll set up trusts, protections. I'll get a spouse's share, but not everything. This way she dies. I'm the grieving fiancé who takes care of everything. We get married and it all comes to me. $3.2 billion. Worth a little patience, don't you think? She laughed at whatever the person on the other end said. I'll handle the maid. And if Margaret doesn't deteriorate faster naturally, I'll help it along. An extra dose of the blood thinners, maybe a fall down the stairs. Alzheimer's patients fall all the time. Tragic but expected. Marcus's hands were shaking as he recorded. This was it. Clear intent, premeditation, murder conspiracy. He had her, but Isabella wasn't done. The Gateman's an idiot. Sits in his little booth all night. He has no idea what's happening 10 feet from him. None of them do. Marcus is so busy saving the world with his technology, he can't see what's happening in his own home. By the time he figures it out, if he ever does, it'll be too late. She hung up, stood there for another moment looking at Margaret. Then she left the room. Marcus sat in the darkness of the gatehouse, his heart pounding. He pulled up the text thread with Elena Rodriguez and sent her the audio file. Her response came 3 minutes later. Holy shit, that's enough. We can move now. When do you want to do this? Marcus thought about Grace, about her promise to protect his mother for 2 more weeks, about the pre-wedding party Isabella was planning in 12 days. He texted back, the party, we do it at the party, maximum witnesses, maximum humiliation. She wanted a society wedding. Let's give her a society exposure instead. You sure you want to wait? She just threatened to push Margaret down the stairs. Marcus looked at the monitors showing his mother's room, looked at the monitor showing Grace's room, where she slept in clothes she could easily wake and change from, ready to respond if Margaret needed her. I'm sure. Grace is watching during the day. I'm watching at night. Between us, Margaret's protected. And in 12 days, Isabella Crane loses everything. He had no idea that in 5 days, Isabella would try to kill his mother anyway, and that Grace would put herself between a murderer and her victim in a way that would change all of their lives forever. Day 12. 7 p.m. Marcus had gone home that afternoon as himself, playing the devoted fiancé. He'd brought Isabella flowers, told her how much he missed her, how excited he was for the wedding in 3 weeks. She'd smiled and kissed him and talked about seating charts and honeymoon destinations, all while planning his mother's death. At 9 p.m., Marcus left again, supposedly for an evening meeting downtown. He transformed in the hotel bathroom, beard, gray hair, glasses, limp, and returned as Robert Santos for the night shift. By midnight, the house was dark. Isabella in the master bedroom, Grace asleep in her small room, Margaret in her bed, breathing steadily. Marcus was watching all 3 monitors when it happened. Isabella got up, moved silently through the dark hallway, entered Margaret's room. Marcus's heart stopped. On the monitor, he watched Isabella go to the IV stand in the corner, the one the doctor had installed for hydration because Margaret had been eating and drinking so little. Isabella had insisted on it, claiming she was worried about dehydration. Now Marcus watched her pull something from her robe pocket. A syringe. No. He was already moving, running from the gatehouse toward the main house, when he saw another figure appear on the monitor. Grace. She must have heard something. She stood in Margaret's doorway in her pajamas, staring at Isabella bent over the IV. Mrs. Crane? Grace's voice was quiet. What are you doing? Isabella spun around. For a second, her face was pure guilt. Then the mask slid back into place. Grace, what are you doing up? I heard something. I was checking on Margaret. Grace's eyes went to the syringe. What is that? Additional medication. The doctor prescribed it. In the middle of the night? It's time sensitive. Go back to bed, Grace. Marcus had reached the back door. He used his keys, his actual keys, and moved silently through the house. On the camera monitor he'd pulled up on his phone, he watched Grace step into the room. "I don't think you should give her that without calling her doctor first." Isabella's voice went hard. "I don't remember asking for your opinion. I'm sorry, Mrs. Crane, but I can't let you inject Margaret with something when she's asleep and can't consent." Marcus was climbing the stairs now, 2 at a time, his disguise forgotten. On the phone screen, he watched Isabella move toward Grace with the syringe still in her hand. "You're fired. Get out." "No." Grace's voice shook but didn't break. "I'm not leaving her alone with you." Marcus burst through the bedroom door. Both women spun around. Isabella's face went through shock, confusion, and then dawning horror as she realized the Gateman looked exactly like Marcus, she breathed. He reached up and ripped off the fake beard. "Hello, Isabella," Grace gasped. "Oh my God." Isabella staggered back. "This isn't... You're supposed to be in Singapore? Downtown? Traveling?" Marcus's voice was cold. "I've been here the entire time, watching you, recording you, every medication you gave her, every time you starved her, every phone call where you planned her murder." The syringe fell from Isabella's hand. "I can explain. You injected my mother with insulin 10 days ago. She's not diabetic. It nearly killed her. Want to explain that?" Isabella's face went white. "How did you..." "Security cameras, hidden ones, audio recorders. I have everything, Isabella. 3 weeks of evidence, including the conversation where you explicitly said you were going to kill my mother for my money." Marcus turned to Grace, who was standing frozen by the bed. "Grace, check on my mother. Make sure she's okay." Grace moved immediately, kneeling beside the bed. "Margaret, can you hear me?" Margaret's eyes fluttered open. "Grace, what's happening?" "You're safe," Grace whispered. "You're safe now." Isabella suddenly lunged, not at Marcus, but at the IV stand, trying to grab the syringe. Grace moved faster. She put herself between Isabella and Margaret, arms spread wide. "Don't you touch her." Isabella laughed, high and hysterical. You're going to stop me? You're nothing, a maid, an immigrant barely scraping by. You think you matter?" "I matter to her," Grace said quietly. "And that's enough." Marcus had already called 911 on his phone. "The police are 2 minutes away, Isabella. It's over." Isabella's perfect composure finally shattered. "You bastard! You lying bastard! You spied on me! You tried to murder my mother. She's dying anyway. The Alzheimer's. In 5 years, she won't even know who you are. I was just speeding up the inevitable." The words hung in the air like poison. Margaret from the bed, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I may forget things, Isabella, but I never forgot what you are. I tried to warn him. He finally listened." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Isabella looked between them. Marcus with his half-removed disguise. Grace standing guard over Margaret. The evidence she didn't know existed but could clearly see had destroyed her. "You'll never prove it. It's your word against mine. A confused old woman and a spurned fiancé. And 17 days of video footage," Marcus said. "And audio of you planning her murder. And testimony from Grace, who watched you try to inject something into an unconscious patient. And the forensic analysis of every medication you gave her. Want to keep going?" The sirens stopped outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Isabella made one last desperate play. She lunged at Marcus, screaming, "You ruined everything! Everything!" Grace stepped forward and pushed Isabella back. Not hard, just enough to stop her momentum. Isabella stumbled, fell to the floor, and finally broke. She curled in on herself, sobbing. The police arrived. Elena Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later with a team of lawyers. By sunrise, Isabella was in custody, facing charges of attempted murder, elder abuse, and fraud. But that's not the end of the story. 3 weeks later, Margaret was sitting in the garden of the Pacific Palisades mansion, color back in her cheeks, eating a sandwich Grace had made for her. She'd gained back 10 pounds. The real medications, combined with regular meals and no stress, had stabilized her Alzheimer's. She'd never be cured, but she was herself again. Marcus sat beside her, no longer disguised as anyone but himself. And Grace was there too, though her role had changed. You know, Margaret said, looking at her son, when I first met Isabella, I told you something was off. You didn't listen. I know, Mom, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be smarter next time. Margaret smiled, like smart enough to realize that sometimes the most valuable people come into your life disguised as something else. Grace came here as a maid, but she's family now. Grace, sitting on Margaret's other side, ducked her head. Mrs. Thornfield, Margaret, how many times do I have to tell you? Margaret, I was just doing what anyone would do. No, Marcus said quietly. You did what most people wouldn't. You risked everything. Your job, your sister's tuition, your future for someone you barely knew. That's not what anyone would do. That's what a hero does. Grace's eyes filled with tears. I just kept thinking about my grandmother, how scared she was near the end, how much she needed someone to protect her. I couldn't save her, but I could save Margaret. Well, Margaret said briskly, good thing Marcus here has more money than sense. He's paying Emily's tuition through medical school. Full ride. And you're not cleaning houses anymore. Grace stared. What? Marcus smiled. I'd like to hire you as my mother's full-time companion. Live here, make sure she's okay, keep her company. The salary is considerably more than maid work. And before you protest, this is selfish on my part. You're the only person I trust with her. The only person who proved they'd die before they let someone hurt her. Grace put her face in her hands and cried. Happy tears this time. Margaret patted her back. Oh, honey, we're your family now. Get used to it. From the gatehouse, which Marcus had converted into a guest house, they heard laughter. Emily had come down from Berkeley for the weekend. She was becoming a fixture around the mansion, studying for her organic chemistry exams while her sister worked. You know, Margaret said slyly, Grace, my son needs someone who challenges him, keeps him honest. Mom, Marcus groaned. What? I'm just saying. After everything that happened, Marcus understands that character matters more than appearances. That courage comes in unexpected packages. That sometimes the person you need most is someone who started out as a stranger. Grace and Marcus looked at each other. Something passed between them. Understanding, respect, the beginning of something neither was ready to name yet. One step at a time, Mom, Marcus said. Fine, fine. But take the step. Life's too short to waste time, especially when you've just learned how precious time really is. They sat there in the garden as the sun set over the Pacific. Three people who'd been brought together by evil and bound together by courage. Isabella's trial was set for 6 months from now. The evidence was overwhelming. She'd spend decades in prison, but that wasn't the victory that mattered. The victory was Margaret laughing at something Emily said. Grace's smile as she realized she'd finally found a place where she belonged. Marcus understanding that the most important things in life couldn't be bought. They had to be earned through trust, through sacrifice, through showing up when it mattered most. And somewhere in San Francisco, in a small cemetery overlooking the bay, two immigrant parents rested easier knowing their daughters were taken care of, that their sacrifices had meant something, that Grace's promise to their mother had been kept. Sometimes the hero doesn't wear a cape. Sometimes the hero wears a maid's uniform and risks everything for a stranger because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes the billionaire learns that all his money couldn't save the person he loved most, but a brave young woman with nothing could. That's the real story. Not the money, not the mansion, not the dramatic reveal at the party that never happened because Isabella was arrested 3 weeks early. The real story is about Grace Chen, who proved that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite being terrified of the cost. If you made it to the end of this story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button because you're part of a community that believes in justice, in courage, in standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. And drop a comment telling me, who's the bravest person you've ever met? Who's the person who taught you what real courage looks like? Share your story. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's scared to speak up, someone who thinks they're too small to make a difference, send this to them. Let them know that one person with courage can change everything. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next story.